I was stationed in Okinawa working cyber intelligence for the United States Navy when my father sold my house to pay off my deadbeat brother. When I dragged my heavy suitcase up the driveway after a grueling 30-hour flight, they were standing on my front porch smirking. "You do not live here anymore, Zuri." "We cashed out?" my father announced. I did not scream or cry. I just smiled. My dad snapped, asking what was so funny. I simply replied that the house they sold was not exactly what they thought. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your trust completely broken by the people who were supposed to protect you. The journey from Okinawa to Atlanta is a punishing test of endurance. For 30 straight hours, I was folded into cramped airplane seats existing on stale coffee and recycled air functioning purely on the anticipation of returning to my sanctuary. I am Zuri Washington, 29 years old, and my home was the one piece of peace I had carved out for myself in this world. It was a beautiful property in one of Atlanta's most prestigious neighborhoods, a house I had purchased with the life insurance money my late mother left me, combined with every single dollar I had saved since enlisting in the Navy. It was my pride and joy, a tangible proof that I had made something of my life, despite the constant lack of support from my family. As my taxi pulled onto my quiet, tree-lined street, all I wanted was a hot shower and my own bed. I paid the driver, tipped him generously, and pulled my heavy military duffel out of the trunk. The humid Georgia air clung to my skin, a stark contrast to the sterile chill of the airplane cabin. But as the taxi drove away, and I turned to face my beautiful brick house, my exhaustion was instantly replaced by a sharp, icy spike of confusion. There, stacked haphazardly across my pristine front porch, were dozens of cheap, flimsy cardboard boxes. Some were taped shut, while others were overflowing with my clothes, my books, and my personal belongings. A few items had spilled onto the porch floor, including a framed photograph of my mother that now lay face down on the concrete. For a split second, my military training kicked in. I scanned the perimeter, assessing for a break in, wondering if squatters or thieves had ransacked my property while I was deployed overseas serving my country. Then the heavy oak front door swung open. My father, Marcus, stepped out onto the porch, closely followed by my older brother, Jamal. They did not look like men who had just interrupted a burglary. They looked entirely too comfortable standing there with their shoulders squared and their chins raised. My father wore one of his expensive tailored suits, the kind he always wore to project an image of extreme wealth and success to his country club friends. Jamal, at 33 years old, wore designer sneakers and a flashy gold watch, looking exactly like the overgrown teenager he was. "Dad," I said, my voice hoarse from the long journey. "Jamal, what is going on here? Why is all my stuff outside in boxes?" My father did not step forward to hug his daughter, who had been deployed overseas for months. He did not ask how my flight was. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest and looked down at me from the top step like I was an unwanted solicitor. "You are home early," Marcus said flatly. His tone carried no warmth, only a mild irritation that my arrival had clearly messed up their timeline. "I finished my assignment," I replied, dropping my duffel bag onto the driveway. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet neighborhood. "I asked you a question. Why are my belongings packed in cheap cardboard boxes and thrown on the porch like trash?" Jamal snickered, leaning against the doorframe of my house. "Because it is not your house anymore, little sister. You have been relocated." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process his words through the dense fog of jet lag. I looked back at my father, expecting him to reprimand Jamal for the tasteless joke. But Marcus just stood there, his face completely devoid of any guilt or hesitation. "Jamal is telling the truth, Zuri," my father said, using his authoritative voice, the one he always used when he expected absolute obedience. "I sold the property. The paperwork was finalized yesterday morning. The new owners want the place cleared out by tomorrow, so we packed your things. You should be grateful we did the heavy lifting for you." The world seemed to stop spinning for a fraction of a second. I looked at the beautiful brick facade, the large windows, the garden I had meticulously planted before I left. "I sold the property." The words echoed in my mind, making absolutely no sense. "You sold my house?" I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. The house I bought with my own money and Mom's inheritance. It was a necessary family decision, Marcus declared, puffing out his chest. Your brother was in a tight spot. He had some serious debts that needed immediate settling, and he has a brilliant new business venture that requires capital. I sold this house for $850,000 cash. Every single cent went directly to paying off Jamal's obligations and funding his new company. I looked at Jamal, the brother, who had never held a steady job in his life. The man who had bankrupted 3 different businesses while draining our father's retirement accounts. He stood there smirking, completely unbothered by the fact that he was actively stealing his younger sister's home to cover his own failures. You are a single woman in the military. Zuri, my father, continued, speaking to me as if I were a child who could not grasp basic logic. The Navy provides you with housing and food. What do you need a $900,000 mansion in Atlanta for? It is a waste of resources. Jamal is the man of this family. He needs to establish his legacy. We have to look out for each other, and sometimes that means making sacrifices for the greater good of the family name. The sheer audacity of his speech washed over me. For years I had endured this exact toxic dynamic. I had watched my father bend over backwards, sacrificing his own financial security and my well-being just to maintain the illusion that Jamal was a successful, capable man. But this was a new level of delusion. They had literally packed up my life and sold the roof over my head just to bail Jamal out of his gambling debts one more time. You stole my home, I stated, simply, not raising my voice, not giving them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. I did not steal anything. Marcus snapped, his face flushing with sudden anger at my lack of compliance. I am your father. I am the head of this family. I made a financial decision to protect your brother. You will not stand on this driveway and disrespect me after everything I have done for you. Jamal stepped forward, looking down at me with pure arrogance. Come on, Zuri, do not be so dramatic. You are always making everything about yourself. You can easily find a nice little apartment downtown. This house was too big for you anyway. You should be happy you are helping me build my empire. I stood motionless on the driveway, the humid heat pressing down on me. I looked at my boxes, roughly taped and abandoned. I looked at my father, who was glaring at me with self-righteous pride. I looked at Jamal, whose smug expression was a permanent fixture on his face. They were waiting for me to scream. They were waiting for me to drop to my knees and cry over the loss of my beautiful home. They were waiting to call me hysterical and crazy, but I did not scream. I did not cry. Instead, a terrifyingly calm clarity settled over my mind, because the shock I was feeling was not about losing the house. I knew perfectly well that I had not lost my house. My shock was rooted in a much more dangerous, much more technical question. Before I deployed to Okinawa, I had legally transferred the full ownership of this property into a heavily guarded, federally protected, irrevocable trust. I was the only person on the planet with the authority to move a single brick of this estate. So as I stood there looking at my father and brother gloating over their $850,000 cash sale, my mind was racing with one single thought. How the hell did they manage to sign those papers? The heavy oak door swung open a few inches wider, and the sharp, rhythmic clicking of designer heels against the hardwood floor signaled the arrival of the final piece to this twisted family puzzle. Chloe stepped out into the humid Georgia heat, looking as though she had just walked off the set of a reality television show about wealthy suburban housewives. She was Jamal's wife, a woman who had married into our family 2 years ago, and immediately appointed herself the supreme authority on all matters regarding our lives. In her arms, she cradled a perfectly groomed toy poodle, wearing a collar that likely cost more than my first car. Chloe looked down at me from the elevated porch, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun, her expression a masterclass in performative pity. She did not see a military intelligence officer who had just spent months defending national security. She saw an obstacle. She saw the sister-in-law she had always deemed too aggressive, too independent, and entirely too uncooperative. Jamal immediately puffed out his chest a little more the moment his wife appeared beside him. He draped his arm around her waist, playing the role of the successful patriarch, a role he could only perform using my stolen assets as his stage. My father Marcus actually smiled when he looked at Chloe. The contrast was nauseating. He had just glared at his own flesh and blood with absolute contempt, but he looked at this woman with nothing but pride and approval. "Zuri, honey, you look absolutely exhausted," Chloe purred, her voice dripping with that syrupy, condescending sweetness she used whenever she was about to deliver a profound insult. "You really should have called ahead. We would have hired a car to take you straight to a hotel. Standing out here in the heat is not doing you any favors." I stared at her, my hands resting loosely at my sides. I did not blink. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to bear the weight of her own audacity. The poodle whined in the oppressive humidity, but Chloe simply stroked its head, unfazed by my silence. She adjusted her stance, shifting her weight effortlessly in her expensive heels, and looked at the cardboard boxes scattered around my feet. "It is always so hard to let go of the past." She continued, her tone shifting into a rehearsed monologue. "But Jamal and I have been talking, and your father completely agrees. You have to look at the bigger picture here, Zuri. You are a single woman. You are deployed half the time. The military provides your housing, your food, your basic needs. What on earth does a single woman with no husband and no children need with a 4-bedroom estate in a neighborhood like this? It is practically selfish to hoard a property like this when your brother has a real family to provide for." I listened to the words pour out of her mouth, fascinated by the sheer magnitude of her entitlement. She was standing on my porch holding a dog she bought with my brother's borrowed money, explaining to me why I did not deserve the house I had purchased with my dead mother's life insurance. "Jamal is the head of this family now," Chloe stated, lifting her chin. "He is a provider. He needs capital to build his legacy to ensure that our future children have the kind of life they deserve. You have always been so rigid, Zuri. So unwilling to be a team player. But family is about sacrifice. You should be proud to step aside and let your brother take his rightful place. You should know how to sacrifice for the men in your life." My father nodded slowly, practically glowing at Chloe's words. "She speaks the truth," Zuri Marcus added, completely blind to the manipulation. "You have always been too fiercely independent for your own good. It is time you contributed to this family instead of just looking out for yourself." The sheer psychological warfare of their unified front was staggering. They had convinced themselves that stealing my home was an act of righteous family duty. Chloe sighed dramatically, playing the role of the benevolent peacekeeper. She reached into her pristine designer handbag and pulled out a small rectangular slip of paper. "We do not want to leave you with absolutely nothing," Chloe said, her voice dropping an octave to convey a sickening sense of charity. "We know transitioning back to civilian life can be stressful, even if it is just until your next deployment. Jamal and I want to help you get back on your feet. Consider it a thank you for your contribution to his new company." She flicked her wrist, and the slip of paper fluttered through the thick summer air, landing face up on the concrete driveway right next to my scuffed military boots. I looked down at it. It was a check. A personal check signed by Jamal Washington, written out to Zuri Washington. The amount was $5,000. They had sold my $900,000 home, pocketed $850,000 in pure cash, and were currently throwing a $5,000 check at my feet like I was a beggar asking for spare change. They expected me to pick it up. They expected me to be grateful. They expected me to walk away with my tail between my legs, defeated by the united front of my father's authority and my sister-in-law's weaponized privilege. For 10 seconds, the only sound on that driveway was the distant hum of a lawnmower and the panting of Chloe's expensive dog. I felt the familiar fiery rush of betrayal threatening to rise in my throat. A weaker version of myself would have screamed. A younger version of myself would have demanded explanations, cried over the destroyed photographs of my mother, and begged my father to love me as much as he loved the son who continuously failed him. But I was not that girl anymore. I was a cyber intelligence specialist. I spent my days dissecting complex threat matrices, identifying vulnerabilities in highly secure networks, and destroying enemy infrastructure without ever raising my voice. I looked at the $5,000 check on the concrete. I looked at Chloe's triumphant smirk. I looked at Jamal's arrogant posture. I looked at my father's stern, unyielding glare. And then I smiled. It did not start as a wide grin. It started as a subtle softening of my features, a slight curve at the corners of my mouth. But as the absolute hilarity of their profound stupidity washed over me, the smile grew. It was a genuine, radiant smile. It was the smile of a predator, watching three mice walk willingly into a steel trap and lock the door behind themselves. My father's authoritative posture faltered. His thick eyebrows slammed together in a deep frown. He took a step closer to the edge of the porch, clearly unsettled by my reaction. "What is so funny?" Marcus demanded, his voice sharp and defensive. "I just told you that your house is gone. What are you smiling at?" Jamal shifted uncomfortably, his smirk fading. Chloe tightened her grip on her dog, her perfectly practiced expression of pity replaced by genuine confusion. They did not understand. They had anticipated rage. They had prepared for tears. They had absolutely no defense against pure, unadulterated amusement. I did not answer my father immediately. I slowly bent down the fabric of my uniform stretching across my back and picked up the $5,000 check. I held it up between my fingers, inspecting it as if it were a fascinating piece of garbage. Then, with deliberate, agonizing slowness, I ripped the check straight down the middle. I placed the two pieces together and tore them again. I let the shredded confetti of Jamal's fake charity flutter out of my hand and scatter across the driveway. Chloe gasped quietly, her hand flying to her chest. Jamal took a step forward, his fists clenching at his sides. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped the screen a few times to order an Uber. I did not look at my scattered belongings. I did not look at the heavy oak door of the home I had poured my heart into. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the three people standing on the porch. My Uber driver was 2 minutes away. I stood in silence, letting the suffocating tension wrap around their throats. I could see the gears turning in their heads, the sudden creeping realization that they had fundamentally miscalculated my response. They thought they were dealing with a heartbroken daughter. They forgot they were dealing with an operative who built firewalls for a living. A sleek black sedan turned onto the street, slowly rolling toward my driveway. I picked up my heavy military duffel bag, swinging it effortlessly onto my shoulder. The car pulled up to the curb, and the driver popped the trunk. I turned back to face my family one last time. The smile had not left my face. It was colder now, sharper, cutting through the humid air like a blade. I looked straight into my father's eyes, then at Jamal, and finally settled my gaze on Chloe. "I hope you enjoy spending that money," I said, my voice steady, conversational, and utterly terrifying. "Enjoy every single cent of it, truly, because I highly suggest you spend it all before tomorrow morning." I turned around, walked to the black sedan, tossed my bag into the trunk, and climbed into the back seat. I did not look out the window as the car drove away. I did not need to. I already knew exactly what they looked like, standing on that porch, paralyzed by a sudden chilling dread, staring at the empty driveway, and wondering what was coming for them at dawn. I stand up from the leather armchair, abandoning my bourbon glass on the side table. The camera glides seamlessly alongside me, a smooth tracking shot, keeping pace as I walk slowly toward the massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city lights are just beginning to flicker to life against the twilight, but my mind is cast backward, dissecting the exact anatomy of my family's dysfunction. To understand how my father and brother could stand on my porch and proudly announce they had stolen my home, you have to understand the specific brand of delusion that fueled my father. Marcus Washington is a man completely consumed by the concept of black excellence. But he does not care about the substance of excellence, the hard work, the integrity, or the genuine achievement. He only cares about the aesthetic. He wants the corner table at the most exclusive country club. He wants the neighbors to see the luxury European sedans parked in his driveway. He desperately needs to be perceived as the patriarch of a flawless, untouchable, upper-echelon African-American dynasty. In his mind, we were Atlanta royalty, and he was the king. And in this imaginary kingdom, Jamal was the undeniable crown prince. From the day he was born, my brother was burdened, or perhaps blessed, with the expectation of carrying the family name into the stratosphere. He was supposed to be the titan of industry, the brilliant CEO who would land on magazine covers. There was only one massive problem with this grand vision. Jamal is profoundly incompetent. I do not say that out of petty sibling rivalry. I say it as a documented financial fact. By the time he was 30 years old, my golden child brother had filed for bankruptcy 3 separate times. First, it was a lifestyle app that burned through hundreds of thousands in investor capital before a single line of working code was even written. Then he launched a boutique fitness franchise that spectacularly collapsed under a mountain of unpaid vendor invoices and gross mismanagement. Finally, he fell for a catastrophic crypto trading scheme that left him owing very dangerous people a lot of money. Did my father ever let his golden boy learn a lesson or face the consequences of his actions? Absolutely not. Every single time Jamal drove a business off a cliff, Marcus was there, with a safety net woven from his own retirement accounts. My father would quietly liquidate his assets, take out high-interest second mortgages, and write massive checks to scrub Jamal's record clean. He would package my brother's catastrophic failures as minor setbacks or brilliant learning experiences, shielding him from the reality of his own sheer stupidity. In the Washington household, Jamal was allowed to fail spectacularly, repeatedly, and expensively. He was literally rewarded for his mediocrity because admitting Jamal was a failure meant admitting my father's pristine family image was a fraud. Then there was me, the daughter, the afterthought. If Jamal was the crown prince, I was the unseen labor keeping the castle walls from crumbling. The punishing standards of excellence applied to me, but the funding did not. When it came time for my education, the family coffers were mysteriously empty. Marcus told me that hardship built character for women, and that the family resources needed to be reserved for Jamal's future empires. So I built character. I took out crushing student loans just to get my foot in the door at a state college. I worked overnight shifts to pay for my textbooks. When the debt became suffocating and I realized I could not afford to finish my degree, I did not cry to my father for a bailout. I marched into a recruiter's office and enlisted in the United States Navy. I traded years of my life, my physical safety, and my youth to earn my degree in cybersecurity and network intelligence. I climbed the ranks in a fiercely competitive, male-dominated military environment. I learned to read complex code, track international digital threats, and build impenetrable firewalls for government networks. I had to be absolutely flawless. One mistake in my line of work could compromise national security. I was never allowed a single misstep, a single moment of weakness. Yet whenever I came home on leave in my dress uniform bearing military commendations and advanced technical certifications, my father would offer a tight, obligatory nod before eagerly shifting the conversation back to Jamal's latest pipe dream. My success was a baseline expectation, never an achievement worth celebrating. My complete independence was actually a threat to their narrative because it proved they were entirely unnecessary to my survival. But they drastically underestimated what my independence truly meant. They looked at my beautiful, sprawling home in Atlanta and saw a giant piggy bank. They saw a convenient pile of premium bricks they could liquidate to finance the Crown Prince's fourth attempt at playing businessman. They thought I bought that house purely with Navy paychecks and good credit. They assumed it was just a piece of property I could easily replace. They had absolutely no idea where the capital for that house actually came from. When my mother passed away 5 years ago, she did something incredibly strategic. My mother knew exactly what my father would do with her life insurance policy if he got his hands on it. She knew Marcus would hand it straight to Jamal to burn on a poker table or another failed startup. So she bypassed my father entirely. She went behind his back and made me the sole direct beneficiary of her policy. I took that money, every last dime of my mother's final gift to me, and I poured it into the foundation of that house. Buying that property was not just a real estate investment for a single woman in the military. It was a sacred monument to the only person in that entire family who ever actually believed in me. I swore on my mother's grave that I would protect her legacy against the parasites who shared our last name. I vowed to defend that house by any means necessary against any threat, domestic or foreign. And a cyber intelligence officer never makes a vow she cannot execute perfectly. The smooth leather of the back seat offered a quiet sanctuary as the black sedan navigated the winding suburban streets, leaving the manicured lawns and the suffocating presence of my family far behind. I kept my eyes fixed on the digital display of my encrypted military smartphone. The screen was already lighting up with frantic, poorly spelled text messages from Jamal and missed call notifications from my father, but I simply switched the device to airplane mode. Let them panic. Let the paranoia sink into their bones. To fully comprehend the absolute earth-shattering magnitude of the trap they had just willingly walked into, you have to rewind the clock exactly 8 months. 8 months ago, the official orders for my deployment to Okinawa had just landed on my desk. It was a highly classified high-stakes assignment, managing cyber defense infrastructure for the Pacific Fleet. The preparation alone was a logistical nightmare. I was working 80-hour weeks, liquidating unnecessary assets, packing my gear, and trying to secure my personal life before shipping out to Japan. That was the precise moment my father decided to swoop in, wearing the mask of a deeply concerned protective patriarch. Marcus came to my house unannounced on a rainy Sunday afternoon. He sat at the very kitchen table I had purchased with my first major military bonus, sipping coffee and looking around the estate with calculating eyes. He brought a thick, leather-bound folder filled with legal documents. The centerpiece of this collection was a comprehensive general power of attorney. He spun a masterful, emotionally manipulative tale about the inherent dangers of leaving a premium piece of real estate unattended while stationed halfway across the globe. He talked about burst pipes, hurricane damage, miscalculated property taxes, and squatter rights. He insisted with a terrifyingly convincing display of paternal affection that he needed full legal authority to manage the estate on my behalf. He claimed it was his duty to protect my mother's legacy while I was off serving the country. I was exhausted. The deployment preparations had drained me, and for a brief, foolish fraction of a second, I almost believed him. I almost believed that my father actually cared about protecting my sanctuary. I told him I would review the paperwork and get back to him. I might have actually signed those standard documents the very next day if my internal security network had not tripped a massive red flag just 72 hours later. As a cyber intelligence officer, my personal digital security is airtight. I do not rely on standard banking firewalls. I build my own algorithmic tripwires. Late on a Wednesday night, an automated fraud alert pinged my secure server. Someone was attempting to process a $15,000 charge on a high-limit credit card I kept locked inside a biometric safe in my home office. The transaction was repeatedly failing because the card required two-factor authentication for any purchase over $1,000, a security protocol the thief clearly did not anticipate. I did not call the police. I did not call the bank. I simply sat down at my terminal and traced the digital breadcrumbs. I isolated the IP address of the device attempting the transaction. I tracked the routing packets through a series of poorly constructed proxy servers. It took me less than 12 minutes to identify the specific MAC address of the hardware. It was a burner smartphone pinging off a local cell tower less than 2 miles from my father's house. The merchant attempting to process the massive charge was a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, heavily associated with underground sports betting syndicates. It did not take a military genius to put the pieces together. Jamal was drowning again. My golden child brother had racked up another catastrophic gambling debt, and this time he owed money to people who did not send polite collection letters. He had broken into my home office while I was at the naval base, copied my financial data, and tried to drain my credit line to save his own skin. He failed not because he had a sudden change of heart, but because my security protocols blocked him. That failed $15,000 theft was the catalyst. It was the moment the blinders fell completely away from my eyes. I realized with absolute chilling clarity that my father's sudden concern for my property taxes had absolutely nothing to do with protecting my assets. Jamal needed a massive cash injection. $15,000 was just a band-aid. He needed hundreds of thousands of dollars to clear his debts and fund his next delusional business venture. Marcus was not stepping in to pay the bills out of his own pocket this time. Marcus was stepping in to hand my brother the keys to my kingdom. They needed that power of attorney to legally bypass me. Their plan was terrifyingly simple. They would wait until I was buried in classified briefings in Okinawa, legally put my house on the market, forge whatever secondary consent they needed, and liquidate the only valuable asset left in our bloodline. They assumed that, because I was a woman, and because I was halfway across the world, I would be entirely blind to their machinations until the ink was dry and the cash was safely hidden in Jamal's bank accounts. Normal people would have confronted them. A normal daughter would have driven to their house, screamed until her lungs gave out, canceled the paperwork, changed the locks, and cut them off forever. But screaming does not dismantle a parasite. Screaming just teaches a parasite to be quieter, to hide deeper, and to strike when you are genuinely defenseless. In the military intelligence sector, we are trained to anticipate the breach. We do not just build thick walls to keep the enemy out. We build honeypots. We create fake, highly attractive, seemingly vulnerable systems designed specifically to lure the enemy in. We let the hostile threat believe they have successfully bypassed our security. We let them think they have accessed the mainframe and stolen the data. We allow them to commit the crime fully while we trap them in an isolated, heavily monitored digital environment, tracking every single keystroke so we can completely annihilate their network from the inside out. I decided right then and there to treat my own father and brother exactly like a hostile foreign threat. I needed them to cross the line of no return. I needed them to commit the theft so boldly and so arrogantly that I would have absolute undeniable justification to ruin them. The following Sunday, I invited my father back to my house. I baked fresh pastries. I brewed his favorite dark roast coffee. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, picked up his expensive luxury pen, and I signed the power of attorney documents right in front of his eager, greedy eyes. I made a show of thanking him for taking this heavy burden off my shoulders. I hugged him goodbye and watched him walk back to his car, his chest swelling with the pride of a successful con artist. He thought he had outmaneuvered me. He thought his patriarchal authority had rendered me blind, deaf, and dumb. He thought that piece of paper was a golden ticket that granted him absolute dominion over my property. Over the next 8 months while I was stationed in Japan, I watched their entire conspiracy unfold in real time through the digital surveillance I had quietly installed on their devices. I watched them list my home. I watched them show my beautiful house to strangers. I watched them negotiate with escrow agents, forge my signature on the final closing disclosures, and gleefully deposit $850,000 into a newly created joint bank account. They thought they had achieved the perfect crime. They thought they had legally sold my home right out from under me using the very weapon I handed them. But they forgot what I do for a living. I do not just write code. I understand how systems operate. The camera whips violently to the right, blurring the sleek leather interior of the black sedan into streaks of dark shadow before snapping into razor-sharp focus. I am now lounging comfortably on the plush leather sofa of my temporary corporate suite in downtown Atlanta, a glass of sparkling water resting in my hand. The city lights stretch out behind me through the massive glass windows, but my focus is entirely on the brilliant, catastrophic legal trap my family just swallowed whole. It is a fundamental rule of cyber warfare. If you want to capture a highly sophisticated, deeply parasitic virus, you do not just build a thick firewall and hope it keeps them out. A determined threat will always find a backdoor. Instead, you build a mirror universe. You construct a honeypot. You create an environment that looks, feels, and reacts exactly like your real system. You place the most tantalizing, valuable-looking data right in the center of the room. You leave the back door slightly unlatched. You let the hostile threat believe they have successfully bypassed your security. You let them think they have accessed the mainframe and stolen the crown jewels. You allow them to commit the crime fully and completely, while you sit safely in an isolated, heavily monitored digital environment tracking every single keystroke. You let them dig their own grave so deep that by the time they realize they are trapped, the dirt is already falling on their heads. I applied this exact military intelligence principle to my real estate. 3 months before my father ever sat at my kitchen table with his fake paternal concern and his predatory legal paperwork, I had a very quiet, very expensive meeting with a boutique financial law firm specializing in impenetrable asset protection. I sat in a mahogany-paneled office in Washington and executed a flawless, irreversible legal maneuver. I transferred the total ownership of my estate, the physical deed, the title, the immense equity, and every single legal right associated with that property, into a blind, irrevocable trust. The Zuri Washington Irrevocable Trust became the sole, untouchable legal entity holding the property. I formally and permanently relinquished my status as the individual owner. I handed the administrative control over to a ruthless, faceless corporate trustee. This was the beautiful, fatal blind spot in my father's grand master plan. A general power of attorney allows a designated agent to act on behalf of an individual person. It allowed Marcus to sign legal documents for Zuri Washington. It allowed him to manage bank accounts registered to Zuri Washington. But Zuri Washington did not own that $900,000 house anymore. The trust owned it. Therefore, the power of attorney Marcus forced me to sign was completely powerless over the estate. He was proudly holding a golden key to a lock that no longer existed. Legally speaking, he had as much right to sell my house as he had to sell the Washington Monument. But a trap is utterly useless if the prey knows it is there. If Marcus and Jamal had taken that power of attorney to a competent real estate attorney and encountered a legal wall, immediately they might have backed off. They might have discovered the trust through public records. I could not risk them getting smart. I had to keep them stupid, arrogant, and overwhelmingly greedy. I had to feed their delusions of grandeur. Before I left for Japan, I purchased a massive, heavy-duty commercial-grade biometric safe. I hired a private contractor to bolt it directly into the concrete foundation of my master bedroom closet. Inside that formidable steel box, I placed a collection of highly convincing bait. I left a few old tax returns. I left a stack of expired government savings bonds, and sitting right on top like the Holy Grail, I left the original outdated property deed. The one printed on heavy official county cardstock bearing my name as the sole individual owner, printed 2 years before the irrevocable trust was ever finalized. I knew Jamal better than he knew himself. A locked safe in an empty house is an irresistible psychological trigger for a man actively drowning in illicit gambling debts. I knew that within a week of my deployment flight taking off, he would be pacing my hardwood floors, sweating through his designer shirts, desperately looking for a lifeline to satisfy his bookies. I knew he would immediately drag my father into the scheme. I can perfectly picture the two of them standing in my closet, hiring some black market cash-only locksmith to drill through the biometric seal and pop the hinges. When that heavy steel door finally swung open, they must have felt a rush of absolute euphoria. They reached in, pulled out that outdated piece of paper, looked at my name printed on the official document, and felt the supreme thrill of victory. They genuinely believed they held the keys to the kingdom. They had the power of attorney signed in blue ink. They had the physical deed in their greedy hands. They had the green light to liquidate my entire life and fund their pathetic existence. Armed with this useless arsenal of fabricated authority, they marched right into the offices of a fast cash real estate investment firm. These are the kinds of predatory, aggressive buyers who offer immediate cash for homes, actively bypassing standard mortgage inspections and purposely rushing through lengthy closing periods. They are sloppy and they are greedy, which made them the perfect secondary victims for my trap. My father used his practiced country club charisma, projecting the image of a wealthy, responsible patriarch, managing his deployed daughter's affairs. Jamal used his desperation, masking it as urgent business acumen. They presented the power of attorney and the outdated deed to the investment firm. They swore under penalty of perjury that the documents were current, valid, and legally binding. They sat in an air-conditioned conference room, looked a state-licensed notary directly in the eye, and signed their names to fraudulent closing disclosures. They committed massive title fraud. They committed interstate wire fraud. They unlawfully sold a high-value asset that legally belonged to an untouchable financial trust. The sheer arrogance of their entitlement blinded them to basic legal due diligence. Neither my father, my brother, nor the greedy investment firm bothered to run a deep, updated title search through the county registry. They were all so eager to close the lucrative deal and secure the cash that they completely ignored standard mandatory protocol. Marcus truly believed that as the patriarch of his imaginary royal family, his word and his signature were the ultimate law. Jamal just saw the massive payout that would save his kneecaps from being shattered by his creditors. Chloe saw a lavish shopping spree, a brand new luxury SUV, and a designer purebred dog. I was sitting in a highly secure temperature-controlled server room in Okinawa when the automated alerts began pinging my encrypted tablet. I had set up silent digital tripwires on the county property database. I sat at my desk sipping green tea and watched the entire crime unfold in real time. I watched the fraudulent title transfer request hit the county registry. I watched the investment firm's escrow account initiate the massive transfer of $850,000. I watched the money successfully land in a joint checking account Marcus and Jamal had brazenly opened specifically to launder this illicit transaction. It took an incredible amount of military discipline to sit in that chair and do absolutely nothing. I had to let the transaction clear. I had to let the funds settle. I had to let them fully cross the threshold from opportunistic thieves to documented federal felons. They actually believed they had outsmarted me. They celebrated their brilliant heist, toasting to their own superiority, buying expensive dogs and planning luxury vacations, while handing me a pitiful $5,000 check out of sheer mocking pity. They thought they had successfully executed the perfect crime against a defenseless subordinate woman. But they forgot what I do for a living. I do not just excel at encryption and network defense. I understand exactly how systems operate. They thought they played me, but in reality, they just unlocked the door to a federal penitentiary themselves. The camera angle tilts violently, shifting into a sharp, disorienting Dutch angle. The warm ambient lighting of my Atlanta high-rise drops completely, instantly replaced by the harsh, sterile blue-tinted luminescence of military-grade computer monitors. We are jumping backward, exactly 3 weeks before my boots hit Georgia soil. It was 0300 hours on a Tuesday in Okinawa. The Subterranean Network Operations Center at the Naval Intelligence Base was graveyard silent, save for the low, constant hum of the server rack's cooling systems. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and a lukewarm energy drink, running diagnostic sweeps on classified defense grids. My focus was absolute. In this environment, a single momentary lapse in concentration could mean a catastrophic breach of national security. Then, my secure personal terminal flashed red. It was not a military alert. It was a localized, highly encrypted priority ping from Vanguard Financial Law, the firm exclusively managing my irrevocable trust. The subject line glowed on the screen. Unauthorized title transfer attempt detected. The Cayman Islands burner phone incident was a crude, desperate smash and grab. This was entirely different. This was the final, fatal trap snapping shut. They had actually done it. They had filed the fraudulent paperwork with the county clerk. I did not panic. I did not experience a sudden spike in heart rate or a rush of adrenaline. In my line of work, emotion is a vulnerability. When a threat breaches the perimeter, you do not react. You observe, you analyze, and you gather the intelligence necessary to execute a flawless counterstrike. I bypassed the standard base firewall, utilizing a secure ghosted tunneling protocol I had built specifically for this purpose, and routed my connections straight into the closed-circuit security grid of my Atlanta home. When my father and brother walked through my house admiring the crown molding and the high ceilings, they saw premium real estate. They did not see the micro lenses embedded directly into the smoke detectors. They did not notice the fiber optic audio receptors hidden inside the HVAC vents. I had wired my entire sanctuary with military-grade surveillance technology before my deployment. I could monitor every square inch of that property in high definition, complete with infrared night vision and crystal-clear acoustic capturing. I pulled up the primary living room feed. The visual feed materialized on my monitor, casting a ghostly glow across my face in the dark server room. There they were. My father Marcus sitting comfortably in my custom velvet armchair. My brother Jamal lounging across my Italian leather sofa. Sitting right next to him was his new wife, Chloe, admiring a diamond tennis bracelet that definitely had not been on her wrist a month ago. They were drinking my top-shelf scotch, the reserve bottles I had specifically locked in a glass display case. They had smashed the lock. They were toasting to their own brilliance, their glasses clinking in a sickening celebration of their monumental theft. I reached forward and unmuted the audio feed. I expected to hear them gloating about the $850,000. I expected to hear Jamal bragging about paying off his bookies and funding his next catastrophic business failure. I expected the standard, predictable arrogance of greedy men. I was entirely unprepared for the sheer absolute malice of what they were actually discussing. Jamal took a long sip of my scotch, his feet resting casually on my mahogany coffee table. He looked at my father, a flicker of nervous energy finally breaking through his arrogant facade. He asked the obvious question. He wanted to know what would happen when my deployment ended. He wanted to know what they were going to do when I flew back to Atlanta, drove to my address, and found another family living inside my home. Marcus leaned back in the armchair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He did not look worried. He looked incredibly proud of himself. He smiled that same charming, utterly hollow smile he used to manipulate the country club elite and told Jamal to relax. He explained that selling the house and laundering the money was merely phase 1 of his grand design. Phase 2 was permanent neutralization. My father looked his son dead in the eye and outlined a plan of character assassination so vile it made the blood freeze in my veins. Marcus explained that he had already drafted a series of anonymous, highly detailed letters to be sent directly to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and my commanding officers in the Pacific Fleet. The letters claimed that I was suffering from a severe, undiagnosed psychological breakdown. He planned to submit the forged real estate documents as proof of my supposed erratic manic financial behavior. He intended to paint a picture of a mentally unstable intelligence officer, recklessly liquidating assets and funneling money to unknown foreign entities. His goal was not just to steal my house. His explicit stated goal was to trigger a full-scale military investigation that would immediately strip me of my security clearance, freeze my military pay, and ultimately result in a dishonorable discharge. He wanted to ensure that by the time I landed back in the United States, I would be entirely stripped of my rank, my income, and my credibility. He was actively plotting to destroy my entire career and my freedom solely to guarantee I would never have the resources or the legal standing to challenge their fraud in a federal court. Chloe laughed. She actually giggled, tracing the diamonds on her wrist, and told Marcus he was a genius. Then Jamal chimed in. He set his glass down and laughed about my mother. He told Marcus it was poetic justice. He said it was hilarious that the precious life insurance money our mother had deliberately hidden from them to protect me had finally ended up exactly where it belonged, in his pockets. They mocked her death. They mocked her final wish. They sat in the house built entirely on her legacy and treated her memory like a convenient punchline to their cruel joke. I sat in the dark server room in Okinawa, thousands of miles away, listening to my own flesh and blood enthusiastically plot the total destruction of my life. My hands were perfectly steady as I reached forward and terminated the audio feed. The recording was already saved encrypted and backed up to 3 separate secure locations. They thought they had outsmarted the system. They thought they had secured their wealth and successfully orchestrated my demise. But in reality, they had just hand-delivered the final damning pieces of evidence required to lock the doors of a federal prison cell behind them. The camera whips violently toward me, executing a razor-sharp pan that shatters the sterile ambiance of the server room. The lens pushes in aggressively, stopping only inches from my face. My features are bathed in the harsh blue-white glare of the surveillance monitors, but my eyes tell a different story. There is no shock left in my pupils. There are no tears. There is only a terrifying absolute stillness. It is the cold, calculating, predatory focus of a soldier who has just located the enemy command center and has her finger resting lightly on the launch button. The digital audio feed from my Atlanta living room crackled softly in my earpiece, dragging my attention back to the conspirators lounging on my furniture. Jamal was pacing the length of my hand-knotted Persian rug. The initial intoxicating euphoria of popping my safe and finding the fake deed had completely evaporated, replaced by the suffocating, frantic reality of his immediate situation. He was sweating heavily, nervously chewing his thumbnail, his designer clothes suddenly looking cheap and rumpled. He stopped pacing and looked at our father with wild, panicked eyes. Jamal explained that possessing the deed was only half the battle. Standard real estate buyers were meticulous. They required 30 to 60 days to close a transaction. They brought in nosy appraisers, cautious title insurers, and unforgiving bank underwriters who scrutinized every single signature and stamp. Jamal's offshore bookies were not going to politely wait 60 days for an underwriter to approve a mortgage. They had given him a strict deadline. They were threatening to fracture his kneecaps and put him in a wheelchair by Friday evening if their accounts were not settled. He had the bait, but he had no way to liquidate it fast enough to save his own life. This was the precise moment Chloe decided to contribute to the family discussion. Up until this exact second, Jamal's wife had been little more than a decorative accessory in our family dynamic. She was the pristine blonde walking symbol of Jamal's desperation to marry into generational wealth. Her family belonged to a specific elite tier of society that hosted charity galas, sponsored museum wings, and smiled tightly at people like my father while quietly ensuring their country club memberships remained highly exclusive. But sitting on my sofa swirling a glass of my premium bourbon, the veneer of high society elegance instantly vanished. In its place, the predatory criminal rot of her family's true nature was laid bare. With a terrifyingly casual tone, sounding as if she were suggesting a trendy new restaurant for brunch, Chloe laid out the actual foundation of her father's vast empire. She looked at my brother with a mixture of pity and condescension, explaining that her father's boutique commercial real estate firm did not operate like a traditional brokerage. They did not cater to young families looking for starter homes. Her father's firm was a highly sophisticated, deeply entrenched front for money laundering. She explained the mechanics of the crime with practiced, chilling efficiency. Her father's syndicate regularly accumulated millions of dollars in dark, unrecorded illicit cash that desperately needed to be washed and integrated into the legitimate banking system. To do this, he required premium physical assets. My custom-built, meticulously maintained $900,000 estate was the absolute perfect vehicle for this criminal enterprise. Chloe proposed a mutually beneficial, entirely illegal solution. Her father would buy my house in a rapid off-the-books, all-cash transaction. He would intentionally bypass the rigorous banking protocols. He would not use underwriters. He would not demand a thorough title search that would inevitably expose the existence of my irrevocable trust. He would simply accept the forged power of attorney and the outdated deed at face value, generating a fast, quiet transfer of funds. Jamal would receive a massive, immediate injection of untraceable capital to pay off his violent creditors before Friday. Chloe's father would acquire a pristine piece of real estate, successfully legitimizing nearly $1 million of dirty money by washing it through the fraudulent sale. It was a symbiotic marriage of two desperate criminal elements. I sat perfectly motionless in the dark server room, my hands resting flat against the cool metal of my desk. I waited for my father to speak. I waited for the man who had spent my entire existence preaching the sacred gospel of black excellence to draw a hard, immovable line. I waited for him to reject the idea of committing federal money laundering. I waited for him to realize the horrific, degrading optics of what was being proposed. He was being asked to hand his own black daughter's hard-earned estate, the physical manifestation of her blood, sweat, and military service, over to a corrupt, covertly racist syndicate of upper-echelon white-collar criminals. I waited for Marcus to realize that he was serving up my legacy on a silver platter to a family that viewed us as nothing more than convenient disposable tools. Marcus did not object. He did not experience a sudden crisis of conscience. He did not hesitate for a single second. I watched the high-definition surveillance feed as my father's face lit up with genuine, profound relief. He actually stood up from my velvet armchair, walked across the room, and kissed Chloe on the cheek. He called her a godsend. He praised her brilliant tactical business acumen. He looked at Jamal, his eyes shining with sickening paternal pride, and told him he had finally married a woman worthy of the Washington name. He was entirely willing to aid and abet a massive international money laundering operation, willfully exposing himself to decades in a federal penitentiary simply to coddle his golden boy and maintain the illusion of their superiority. The absolute magnitude of this betrayal struck me with the devastating force of a physical blow. They were not just stealing a house to cover a debt. They were enthusiastically attempting to erase my entire existence, partnering with predators to strip mine my life for parts. They felt completely justified in their actions because in their deeply twisted reality, my only purpose was to serve as a silent, invisible financial stepping stone for Jamal's imaginary empire. The ultimate outrage burned cold and bright in my chest, a finalizing, purifying fire. A father so utterly consumed by his own toxic vanity and his desperate need to protect his incompetent son was eagerly willing to conspire with covertly racist criminals to completely destroy his biological daughter's achievements. They thought they had found the perfect loophole. They thought they had successfully outmaneuvered me and secured their wealth. But in reality, they had just willingly walked into the center of the trap, smiled for the hidden cameras, and personally handed me the definitive, irrefutable evidence required to destroy their lives forever. The camera detaches from its static position, embarking on a slow, fluid, unbroken 360-degree orbit around my workstation. The smooth, sweeping movement stands in stark contrast to the volatile digital warfare unfolding on my monitors. The harsh blue light of the screens paints sharp angles across my face, highlighting a profound, unwavering calm. There is no panic. There is no rushed, frantic typing. There is only the calculated precision of an apex predator watching its prey step willingly onto the trigger plate. Right on cue, a secondary encrypted line blinks rapidly on my console. It is not a military channel. The caller ID displays a secure routed connection from Vanguard Financial Law in Washington. I tap the earpiece to accept the call. The voice of Arthur Sterling, my lead trust attorney, fills my ear. Sterling is a brilliant, aggressive corporate lawyer. He is paid extraordinarily well to protect the Zuri Washington Irrevocable Trust from any conceivable threat. He is looking at the exact same public registry alerts I am currently monitoring. He is looking at the fraudulent title transfer request filed by Chloe's father's shell company. Sterling is operating entirely on standard legal instincts. His voice is tight with urgency as he outlines his immediate countermeasure. He tells me his paralegals have already drafted an emergency injunction. He wants my authorization to immediately contact the county clerk, flag the deed as a blatant forgery, and file an immediate restraining order against the escrow company to permanently freeze the $850,000 wire transfer before it can process. He wants to hit my father and brother with a massive civil lawsuit for attempted property theft by the end of the business day. He expects me to give the green light. He expects me to panic and slam the brakes to protect my asset. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my green tea, letting the silence stretch across the encrypted Trans-Pacific line. "No, Arthur," I say, my voice dropping to a low, absolute hush. "Do not block the transfer. Stand down." I can practically hear the expensive gears grinding to a halt in his Washington office. He stammers, completely thrown off balance by my directive. He reminds me that they are attempting to steal a $900,000 property. He warns me that allowing a fraudulent deed to enter the county registry creates an administrative nightmare. He insists that it is his fiduciary duty to stop the financial bleeding before the money leaves the buyer's account. I cut him off, my tone slicing through his legal panic with absolute chilling authority. I explained to my highly paid attorney the fundamental difference between a civilian lawyer and a military intelligence officer. A civilian lawyer wants to prevent the crime to save the client a headache. An intelligence officer wants the enemy to commit the crime as loudly, as deeply, and as permanently as possible so the enemy can be entirely eradicated. If we block the transaction now, I explain, what do we actually accomplish? We give them a slap on the wrist. Marcus will hire a slick defense attorney. He will claim he misunderstood the parameters of the power of attorney. He will play the victim. He will say it was a clerical error, a father simply trying to manage his deployed daughter's complicated estate. Jamal will claim ignorance. Chloe's father will instantly dissolve his shell company and vanish into the woodwork. They will all walk away with a minor civil dispute, bruised egos, and 0 prison time. They will learn to be smarter, quieter, and more dangerous the next time they decide to strike. I refuse to let them learn. I refuse to let them walk away. Let the escrow company clear the funds. I command, my eyes tracking the pending wire transfer on my secondary monitor. Let Chloe's father's dirty money move out of his accounts. Let them sign every single forged disclosure document in blue ink. Let the $850,000 transfer cleanly and directly into the joint checking account Marcus and Jamal just opened. Sterling is silent for a long, heavy moment. When he finally speaks, his voice has shifted from urgent panic to a low, respectful realization. He is beginning to see the architecture of the honeypot. He is beginning to understand exactly how deep this grave is going to be. I walk him through the tactical escalation, breaking down the exact federal statutes they are about to gleefully violate. Right now, attempting to use a forged deed is a state-level issue. It is a local problem. But the second that money moves, the entire paradigm shifts. Selling a property you do not own using fabricated legal authority is fraud. But transmitting $850,000 of illicit, fraudulently obtained funds across state or international banking lines instantly elevates the crime to federal wire fraud. Furthermore, because Chloe's father is intentionally using this real estate transaction to wash illegally obtained cash from his syndicate, the moment Marcus and Jamal accept those funds, they are no longer just opportunistic thieves. They become active, willing participants in a massive, coordinated federal racketeering scheme. By accepting that specific money, they are crossing the threshold into money laundering. They are not just playing with local police departments or county judges anymore. They are actively inviting the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS directly into their living room. Federal wire fraud carries a 20-year maximum sentence. Money laundering carries another 20 years. They are stacking consecutive federal felonies on top of each other like a house of cards, all while smiling and drinking my premium scotch. If we stop the wire, we save the house, but we let the criminals go free. If we let the wire clear, the irrevocable trust still owns the house because a forged deed transferred by a non-owner is legally void ab initio. It holds 0 legal weight. The trust loses nothing. But Marcus, Jamal, and Chloe's father lose everything. They will be holding $850,000 of highly radioactive federal evidence in their personal bank accounts. Let them have their victory, Arthur, I say, leaning back in my chair, the monitors reflecting in my eyes. Let them pop the champagne. Let Jamal pay off his bookies. Let Chloe buy her designer bags. Let my father sleep soundly, believing he is the untouchable king of Atlanta. Document every single millisecond of the transfer. Archive the routing numbers. Secure the IP addresses of the digital signatures. We are going to build a watertight, irrefutable federal dossier, and we are going to hand it directly to the United States Department of Justice. Sterling breathes a heavy sigh, the sound of a lawyer recognizing a masterclass in tactical destruction. He confirms the new operational parameters. He will instruct the trust administrators to remain entirely silent. They will allow the fraudulent deed to process. They will not flag the escrow account. They will simply monitor record and build the trap walls higher. Understood. Sterling says, his voice thick with a mixture of professional awe and genuine intimidation. We will let the wire clear. We will let them hang themselves. The line goes dead. I return my attention to the primary surveillance feed. On the screen, Marcus is laughing, patting Jamal on the back. Chloe is looking at her phone, likely already browsing for luxury cars to purchase with their newly stolen wealth. They look so happy. They look so incredibly relieved. They genuinely believe they have won the war before I even knew a battle was taking place. I shift my gaze to the banking interface on my encrypted monitor. The status of the escrow transfer flashes in bold yellow text, pending. It is waiting for the final automated clearinghouse cycle. It is waiting to finalize the destruction of my family. I reach out and rest my hand over my computer mouse. The cool plastic is grounding. This is the moment of no return. Once this clears, there is no going back. There is no family reconciliation. There are no awkward Thanksgiving dinners. There is only the cold, unforgiving machinery of the federal justice system. I watch the pending status blink. I think of my mother's life insurance. I think of the punishing standards, the constant dismissal, the absolute certainty they had that I was nothing more than a stepping stone for their vanity. The yellow text turns green, cleared. The money has officially landed in their account. The federal crime is complete. I click the mouse, locking the digital logs and sealing the archival evidence into the secure server. A cold, razor-thin smile finally breaks across my face. The trap snaps shut. The play officially begins. The camera drops low, gliding smoothly over pristine imported Italian marble. It captures the sharp, rhythmic, predatory click of 5-inch stiletto heels advancing with absolute precision. The lens tracks slowly upward, taking in the razor-sharp crease of bespoke obsidian trousers, the flawless tailoring of a dark, structured blazer, and finally resting on my face. My posture is rigid, my chin held high, radiating the cold, impenetrable authority of a high-ranking military intelligence officer. I am a ghost, walking back into the land of the living, and I am dressed for a funeral. We are back in the present timeline, standing in the grand foyer of the Peachtree Estates Country Club, the most exclusive, heavily guarded bastion of old money and elite society in Atlanta. Through the massive mahogany double doors, the ambient noise of clinking crystal and hushed, wealthy laughter spills into the corridor. Marcus and Jamal are inside, currently hosting the social event of the season. They have rented out the grand ballroom to publicly announce the launch of their brand new, supposedly lucrative enterprise, Washington Elite Developments. It is a fabricated hollow shell of a company funded entirely by the $850,000 of illicit laundered cash they successfully transferred from Chloe's father's criminal syndicate into their own pockets. They are using this lavish, obscenely expensive party to legitimize themselves to parade their newly stolen wealth in front of local politicians, real estate moguls, and our entire extended family. They had spent the last 3 weeks diligently laying the groundwork for my destruction. While I was flying back across the Pacific Ocean, carefully organizing my federal evidence dossiers, Marcus had been making the rounds. He had called my aunts, my uncles, and his wealthy country club associates, weaving a tragic, fabricated narrative. He told them that the pressure of military deployment had finally broken my mind. He whispered that I had suffered a severe manic psychological breakdown. He spread the absolute lie that I was facing a dishonorable discharge and had recklessly liquidated all my assets in a fit of absolute insanity. He had preemptively assassinated my character so thoroughly that if I ever tried to claim he stole my house, everyone would simply view it as the paranoid rambling of a ruined, unstable woman. They expected me to be completely neutralized. They expected me to return to Atlanta, broke, humiliated, stripped of my rank, and utterly defeated. I reach out and push open the heavy mahogany double doors, stepping fully into the brilliant, blinding light of the grand ballroom. The effect is immediate and spectacular. I do not look like a broken woman. I look immaculate. The tailored cut of my designer suit projects pure, unadulterated power. My expression is completely void of the desperation or manic instability my father had so carefully promised them. I look exactly like what I am, a tactical expert stepping onto a battlefield she has already conquered. The jazz quartet playing softly in the corner continues their tune, but the conversation nearest to the doors instantly dies. The silence ripples outward like a stone dropped in a still pond. Heads turn. Conversations abruptly halt mid-sentence. Aunts and uncles who had been shaking their heads in mock pity over my supposed mental collapse just moments before are now staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. The wealthy elite of Atlanta part like the Red Sea as I begin a slow, deliberate march toward the center of the room. I grab a flute of sparkling water from a passing waiter's silver tray, without breaking my stride, never once taking my eyes off the main stage. There they are, standing beneath a massive, ridiculous banner bearing their new company logo. Jamal is wearing a custom tuxedo that fits him poorly, holding a glass of vintage champagne. Chloe is draped over his arm, wearing a silk gown that undoubtedly cost more than a reliable car. And standing front and center is Marcus holding court with a group of local city council members, projecting the ultimate image of the benevolent, successful patriarch. Jamal notices me first. He is in the middle of taking a sip of champagne when his eyes lock onto my figure advancing through the crowd. The glass stops an inch from his mouth. All the color instantly drains from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale under the bright chandeliers. His hand begins to shake so violently that the expensive champagne sloshes over the rim of the crystal flute, spilling onto his pristine tuxedo jacket. He does not even seem to notice. He looks like a man who has just seen a ghost. Chloe follows his petrified gaze. Her confident high society smile vanishes, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. She leans into Jamal, whispering frantically, demanding to know why the sister who is supposed to be locked away in a psychiatric ward is currently walking toward them looking like a wealthy executive. Then Marcus turns around. The transition on his face is an absolute masterpiece of psychological collapse. The practiced, arrogant country club smile literally melts off his features. For a fraction of a second, his eyes widen in pure shock, his brain completely unable to process the data in front of him. The military investigation was supposed to have destroyed me. The NCIS agents were supposed to have grounded me in Japan. I was supposed to be ruined. Instead, I am standing in his rented ballroom, radiating an aura of total control. The shock quickly morphs into a dark, volatile panic. He abruptly excuses himself from the group of confused politicians. He practically shoves a waiter out of his path as he stalks aggressively across the marble floor to intercept me. He cannot let me reach the stage. He cannot let me stand in front of his audience. I stop walking, planting my feet firmly, just a few yards from the main presentation area, calmly taking a sip of my sparkling water. I wait for him to arrive. Marcus crosses the final distance, closing the gap between us. His face is flushed a dangerous deep crimson. He reaches out and grabs my arm tightly, his fingers digging fiercely into the bespoke fabric of my tailored sleeve. He attempts to drag me a half-step backward, trying to force me into the shadow of a massive, towering floral arrangement, desperate to conceal this confrontation from the staring eyes of the elite crowd. He leans in close to my face. His breath is hot-heavy with the scent of expensive bourbon and raw, unfiltered fear. His eyes are wide, wild, and filled with a hateful, desperate rage. He tightens his grip on my arm and hisses, "Are you here to humiliate this family?" I look down at the hand gripping my sleeve. I do not pull away. I do not create a physical struggle. I simply stare at his fingers, my expression completely devoid of emotion, until the sheer freezing weight of my indifference forces him to realize he is holding onto a live wire. He slowly releases his grip, his fingers uncurling from the bespoke fabric of my blazer, though his eyes remain wide with that panicked, feral intensity. He opens his mouth to issue another hushed, desperate threat, but he is immediately interrupted. A heavy wave of expensive, cloying floral perfume washes over the space between us. Chloe glides into my peripheral vision, her silk gown trailing across the imported marble with Jamal following half a step behind her, like an obedient, well-dressed lapdog. The perspective shifts tightly over my right shoulder, framing the confrontation perfectly. The camera focus locks entirely on Chloe. Her face is an absolute masterclass in weaponized high society hospitality. She wears a smile so incredibly sharp and condescending, it could cut through bulletproof glass. She looks me up and down, her eyes tracking the precise tailoring of my suit, momentarily confused that I am not wearing the ragged clothes of a defeated, ruined woman, before she quickly recovers her arrogant composure. Zuri, Chloe purrs, letting my name drag out with exaggerated fake warmth. What an absolute surprise! She emphasizes the word surprise as if I am a stray animal that managed to slip past the valet. I imagine you do not get to see the inside of places like Peachtree Estates very often. The military is so delightfully rugged, so wonderfully blue-collar, but it hardly prepares you for actual high society, does it? She steps closer completely, ignoring the sheer terror radiating from my father. Chloe operates under the absolute blinding delusion of her own untouchability. She believes her father's criminal syndicate is an invisible shield that elevates her above consequences. You must be so incredibly proud of him, Zuri. Chloe continues, placing a manicured hand flat against Jamal's chest. Jamal's family has finally stepped into the real upper class. We are building genuine generational wealth now. We are sitting at the adult table. You should honestly be glad that your little sacrifice helped your brother finally escape the working class. It is so noble of you. She says the word sacrifice with a deliberate, knowing smirk. She knows exactly what she means. She means the theft of my estate. She means the fraudulent transfer of my $850,000 house into her father's money laundering front. She is openly flaunting a federal crime in my face, standing in the middle of a crowded country club, because she truly believes I am utterly powerless to stop her. She views me not as a human being, not as a sister-in-law, but as a convenient, disposable stepping stone that allowed her husband to buy his way into her tax bracket. Jamal laughs. It is a nervous, wet, deeply pathetic sound, but his innate arrogance quickly takes over. Emboldened by his wife's brazen cruelty, he takes another sip of his vintage champagne and leans forward, his chest puffed out in a comical display of fabricated alpha male dominance. Come on, Chloe, do not use big words like generational wealth around the commander here. Jamal sneers, looking me up and down with undisguised contempt. Zuri has always been way too rigid to understand how the real world operates. She is always playing by the rules, always marching in a straight line, always taking orders. She has never known how to actually enjoy life or seize a real opportunity when it presents itself. I stand perfectly still, letting their words wash over me. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the moment is almost intoxicating. I am looking at a man who less than a month ago was facing the very real prospect of having his kneecaps shattered by illegal offshore bookies because of his crippling gambling addiction. Now funded entirely by my stolen equity, he is standing in a rented tuxedo lecturing a naval intelligence officer on how to seize opportunities. They are standing in the middle of a lavish ballroom, hosting a party financed by federal wire fraud, surrounded by local politicians and real estate moguls, actively mocking the woman who currently holds the digital encrypted key to their federal prison cells. It is a spectacular, almost beautiful display of cognitive dissonance. They are completely drunk on their own stolen power. Marcus, however, is not laughing. My father is standing slightly behind them, his face the color of old ash. He is watching my eyes. He knows me better than Jamal and Chloe do. He understands that I do not bluff, and he can see the absolute terrifying absence of fear in my posture. He knows that a cornered, ruined woman would be screaming right now. She would be crying, demanding her house back, causing exactly the kind of hysterical scene he had preemptively warned all his country club friends about. But I'm not crying. I'm not screaming. I'm standing with the relaxed, effortless posture of an apex predator. Chloe misinterprets my silence for submission. She assumes I am intimidated by the wealth in the room, crushed by the realization that they have successfully outmaneuvered me. She leans in closer, dropping the volume of her voice so only the four of us can hear. The sweet Southern belle veneer drops entirely, revealing the cold, venomous reality of who she actually is. We know exactly why you are here, Zuri. Chloe hisses, her eyes narrowing. You found out about the house and you came to throw a pathetic little tantrum. But you need to understand your place right now. My father handled the transaction personally. The paperwork is filed. The money is cleared. It is sealed and it is done. You have absolutely no power here. If you try to make a scene, I will have security drag you out by your hair, and Marcus has already made sure every single person of influence in this room knows you are completely mentally unhinged. Do yourself a massive favor. Turn around, walk out quietly through those mahogany doors, and we might write you a little charity check to cover your economy flight back to whatever military base you crawled out of. The silence stretches between us. It is a heavy, suffocating weight. Jamal is smirking, practically vibrating with his perceived victory. Chloe is triumphant, her chin raised in a challenge she believes I cannot possibly answer. Marcus is sweating through his expensive tailored shirt, his eyes darting frantically toward the security guards stationed near the exits. They expect a reaction. They expect a verbal assault, a physical lunge, a tearful breakdown. They desperately need me to act like the crazy, unstable woman they have painted me to be so they can justify my removal from the premises. I do not give them the satisfaction. I do not offer a single word of insult. I do not raise my voice a fraction of a decibel. Instead, I smile. It is a slow, terrifying, deeply genuine smile. It is the smile of a woman who has already watched the guillotine blade begin its descent. I reach out smoothly, my movements fluid and completely unhurried, and pluck a crystal flute of vintage champagne from the silver tray of a passing waiter. I hold the stem of the glass between my fingers and raise it slightly toward Chloe. It is an elegant, silent, mocking toast to her impending, absolute destruction. Then, without speaking a single word to my father, without acknowledging my pathetic brother, and without giving his delusional wife another second of my time, I turn my back on them. I step past their frozen figures and begin walking directly toward the main stage at the center of the ballroom. I do not rush. My stride is measured, powerful, and commanding. The crowd instinctively parts before me, recognizing the unmistakable authority radiating from my presence. The hushed whispers multiply, spreading like a wave across the room, as the guests watch the supposed family failure take control of the space. Every single eye in the Peachtree Estates Country Club follows my path. The wooden steps leading up to the main presentation stage creak faintly beneath my heels. Every conversation in the Peachtree Estates Grand Ballroom has completely evaporated. The silence is absolute, heavy, and pregnant with anticipation. I step into the center of the platform, the space previously reserved for my father's grand fraudulent unveiling. The overhead spotlight catches me immediately. It bathes my tailored obsidian suit in a stark, brilliant illumination. If there were a cinematic lens capturing this exact moment, it would execute a slow, deliberate tracking shot, creeping inward until my face filled the entire frame, highlighting the absolute predatory calm radiating from my eyes. I am no longer just a discarded daughter or a convenient scapegoat. I am an apex predator who has successfully cornered her prey in a room with no exits. I set my glass of sparkling water down on the clear acrylic podium and reach for the microphone. My fingers wrap securely around the cool metal. At the edge of the stage, the paralysis finally breaks for Marcus. The primal terror of losing control over his carefully constructed social empire completely overrides his initial shock. He lunges forward, his heavy, expensive dress shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble floor. He rushes the short flight of steps, his arm outstretched, his face a mask of desperate, red-faced fury. He intends to physically rip the microphone from my hands. He plans to signal the country club security team to drag me away before I can shatter his illusion. He does not make it past the first step. I do not flinch. I do not step back or display a single ounce of physical intimidation. I simply turn my head and lock eyes with him. I project every ounce of the cold, lethal, unyielding authority I utilize when interrogating hostile combatants in secure facilities. It is a look entirely devoid of any daughterly affection, respect, or hesitation. It is a silent, unmistakable promise of total scorched earth destruction. Marcus freezes instantly. The sheer physical weight of my glare hits him like a concrete wall. His outstretched hand drops limply to his side. His breathing becomes shallow and erratic, his chest heaving under his tailored tuxedo jacket. He is suddenly paralyzingly aware that he is completely outmatched. The phantom authority he lorded over me my entire life evaporates in a fraction of a second. He slowly backs away, retreating into the shadow of the stage curtain, a broken, terrified patriarch forced to watch his empire burn. I turn my attention back to the crowd. I reach into the inner pocket of my blazer and pull out my encrypted military-grade smartphone. The ballroom features a massive state-of-the-art LED presentation screen directly behind the podium. It is currently displaying the fabricated golden logo of Washington Elite Developments. With 3 rapid taps on my screen, utilizing a basic localized network override protocol, I rode on the flight over from Okinawa. I completely hijacked the country club's audiovisual system. The giant Washington Elite logo flickers, glitches violently with a harsh digital screech and vanishes into total darkness. I raise the microphone to my lips. My voice booms through the venue's surround sound speakers. It is crystal clear, entirely unwavering, and completely devoid of the manic, hysterical instability my father had so diligently promised them I would display. "Good evening, everyone," I announce, my tone echoing with razor-sharp military precision. I apologize for the sudden interruption, but our family has a rather terrible habit of celebrating prematurely. We love to toast to our own brilliance before the ink is even dry. I pace slowly across the stage, my posture impeccable. My eyes sweep over the sea of wealthy Atlanta socialites, confused local politicians, and my utterly stunned relatives. I let the silence hang over them for a long, punishing moment, ensuring every single person in the room is hanging on my next word. "My father Marcus and my brother Jamal have invited you all here tonight to celebrate the launch of their new, highly lucrative real estate venture. They have likely spent the last hour networking, shaking your hands, and quietly soliciting your investments. But I have a very simple question for the guests of honor." I pivot on my heel, pointing directly at the front row where Jamal is practically hyperventilating next to a petrified Chloe. Dad Jamal, and especially my brand new, incredibly resourceful sister-in-law Chloe. Did you all really think you just sold a standard residential property? Did you truly believe you could just hire a black market locksmith, drill into my biometric safe, steal a piece of outdated cardstock, and walk away with nearly $1 million in untraceable cash? A collective sharp intake of breath ripples through the audience. The clinking of glasses stops entirely. The wealthy elite of Atlanta are suddenly realizing they are not attending a corporate business launch. They are captive witnesses to a public execution. Jamal takes a staggering, trembling step backward, bumping hard into a high-top cocktail table. Chloe's face has drained of all its blood, her skin taking on the color of spoiled milk. Her arrogant high society smirk is entirely obliterated, replaced by the wide-eyed terror of a criminal realizing she has just confessed to the wrong person. "You see," I continue, my voice dropping to a low, lethal cadence that commands the absolute silence of the room. "Selling a house you do not own using a fabricated power of attorney is certainly a crime. But that is just a local issue. Chloe, when your father graciously offered to buy my property in an all-cash off-the-books transaction to help Jamal pay off his violent gambling debts, he wasn't just doing a favor. He was utilizing my estate to wash illicit syndicate money." I pause, letting the word syndicate hang in the air, watching the local politicians in the room physically recoil from Marcus and Jamal as if they are suddenly infectious. "The moment you transmitted $850,000 of that dirty cash across state banking lines into your new corporate checking account, you crossed a massive legal threshold. You committed federal wire fraud and federal money laundering. Those are crimes investigated by the FBI and the IRS. You did not just steal a house, you actively documented your participation in a federal racketeering enterprise." I tap the screen of my phone one final time. The massive LED screen behind me blazes back to life with blinding intensity. It does not show a company logo. It displays a crystal-clear, high-definition scan of a federally stamped, legally binding document. In massive, undeniable print, the real ownership records of the estate are projected for the entire ballroom to see. The document explicitly names the property's sole, untouchable legal owner, crowned by the formidable, unmistakable watermark of the Vanguard Financial Law Irrevocable Trust. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom freezes completely. The air turns instantly to ice as the undeniable, irrefutable proof of their federal crimes towers over them all. The lens pans smoothly away from my face, executing a slow, deliberate sweep across the bright, damning projection screen before locking directly onto the horrified expressions of my father and my brother. The blood has completely abandoned Marcus's cheeks. His usually vibrant, sun-baked complexion has shifted to a sickly, chalky gray under the harsh glare of the crystal chandeliers. He looks like a man who has just been informed his parachute failed to pack. I step away from the acrylic podium, leaving the microphone secured in its stand so my hands are entirely free. My voice projects through the massive ballroom without an ounce of effort, ringing with absolute practiced authority. "Dad," I say the word, echoing with a sharp, mocking clarity that cuts through the dead silence of the room. Did you honestly believe a military intelligence officer would deploy overseas to a high-risk zone and leave a high-value targeted asset completely unprotected? Did you look at my career? Look at my rank and genuinely convince yourself that I was just a naive, careless little girl who forgot to lock the front door on her way out? A low, chaotic murmur begins to sweep through the fringes of the ballroom. The elite guests, the city council members, the wealthy investors, they had been schmoozing all evening, are all rapidly connecting the dots. They are witnessing a live, high-definition confession of corporate and real estate fraud. I can see prominent local politicians physically taking steps backward, desperately trying to put distance between themselves and the toxic blast radius of my family. I gesture casually toward the massive LED screen towering behind me. "The power of attorney you used." I continue, my words slicing through the rising whispers like a surgical scalpel. "The document you so carefully fabricated and had fraudulently notarized by your corrupt friends at the county clerk's office was legally invalidated 3 days before my transport flight left for Okinawa. I revoked it. I sealed it. I archived the revocation with 3 separate federal judges. That house does not belong to me anymore. It has not belonged to me for a month." Marcus is physically swaying. He reaches a hand out to grip the edge of the stage, his knuckles turning white as he tries to keep himself upright. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. The suave, untouchable patriarch of the family is completely malfunctioning in front of the very society he worshipped. "It belongs to the Vanguard Financial Law Irrevocable Trust," I announce, projecting my voice so every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who doubted me can hear the exact mechanics of their ruin. "It is a closed, federally protected corporate entity. You did not sell my house, Marcus. You forged a federal document to authorize the sale of a phantom asset. You sold a property that is legally incapable of being transferred on the open market." The murmurs in the crowd escalate into sharp, audible gasps. The illusion is entirely shattered. Washington Elite Developments is not a rising star in Atlanta real estate. It is a hollow crime scene. Jamal stumbles backward as if he has been physically struck. He bumps hard into a high-top cocktail table, sending a tray of empty champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor. The shattering glass sounds like a gunshot, but nobody even flinches. They are completely paralyzed by the spectacle. Jamal looks like a cornered, terrified animal. He shakes his head violently, his eyes darting frantically between the glowing trust document on the screen and my completely unreadable face. "You are lying," Jamal stammers, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that echoes across the ballroom. "You are bluffing, Zuri. We checked the county registry. The title transferred cleanly. The escrow company pushed the wire. The money is in the account. The $850,000 cleared this morning. We saw the alert. We have the cash." He points a shaking finger at me, desperately trying to cling to the reality where he is a winner, where he is a millionaire, where he finally outsmarted the sister he always deeply resented. He believes the presence of the money is his ultimate shield. He believes that because the digits show up on his banking app, the crime was successful. I stop pacing. I turn slowly, deliberately to face him squarely. I let a cold, razor-sharp smirk touch the corners of my mouth. It is a smile entirely devoid of warmth, a predatory baring of teeth that makes the air in the room drop 10 degrees. I look at my brother, then at my father, and finally at Chloe, whose eyes are currently wide with the dawning horrific realization of what laundering her father's money actually means in a federal context. That is entirely correct, Jamal. I say, my voice dropping to a terrifying absolute calm that freezes the blood in their veins. The money is in your account, and that is the biggest mistake you will ever make in your entire life. The camera executes a sharp, unforgiving close-up on Chloe's face. The remnants of her haughty country club arrogance instantly evaporate, leaving behind the pale, sickly mask of a woman plunging into a terrifying freefall. Her perfectly contoured features twitch. Her mouth parts slightly, but her vocal cords fail to produce a single sound. The realization is beginning to strike her, but her vanity desperately refuses to let the reality settle. I shift my physical stance, rotating my shoulders to center my focus entirely on her. She instinctively shrinks back, pressing herself against Jamal's side, but he is too paralyzed by his own terror to offer any protection. Did you honestly believe your father was a criminal mastermind, Chloe? I ask, my voice ringing with a calm, surgical precision that carries to the furthest corners of the grand ballroom. Did you really think transferring $850,000 in pure, unappraised cash to purchase a high-yield residential property wouldn't trip a dozen automated federal sensors? Your father is a syndicate boss. He specializes in washing dirty money through localized real estate shells. It is a textbook, aggressively predictable methodology. I take a slow, deliberate step forward. The crowd holds its collective breath. The ambient jazz music has long since stopped, leaving only the sound of my voice bouncing off the gilded ceiling. But you, I continue, locking onto her panicked eyes. You managed to achieve something truly spectacular. You took a simple localized property theft and weaponized it into a multi-state federal conspiracy. You were so desperate to secure Jamal's bailout, so eager to elevate yourselves into this fabricated high society, that you pushed the transaction through a fabricated escrow. You bypassed standard appraisals. You bypassed mandatory holding periods. You skipped every single regulatory safeguard that prevents immediate digital flagging. Chloe attempts to speak, her voice trembling, a fragile, broken whisper. She stammers defensively, claiming that the transaction was handled privately, that her father's lawyers assured her the shell company was perfectly insulated, that I am just a bitter, jealous sibling trying to ruin her husband's big night. I do not let her finish. I cut her off with the absolute, uncompromising authority of a military commander neutralizing an active threat. There is no insulation from the United States Treasury. I state my words, hitting her like physical blows. When your father initiated that digital transfer, he flagged his own syndicate. But the moment you, Jamal, and Marcus accepted those funds into your newly minted corporate account, the legal paradigm entirely shifted. You did not just receive a loan. You actively, willfully accepted the proceeds of an illicit enterprise. You transformed your father-in-law and your husband into documented accomplices in a federal wire fraud ring. Marcus lets out a choked, wet sound from the shadows near the stage curtains. He is gripping the heavy velvet drape as if it is the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. The local politicians, city council members, and wealthy real estate moguls he had spent the entire evening courting are now actively retreating toward the exit doors. No one with established wealth or political ambition wants to be photographed in the same room as a confessed federal money laundering operation. The social isolation is immediate, brutal, and absolute. The grand ballroom, which was meant to be their coronation, has transformed into a containment zone. You see, I project to the hushed crowd, making sure every single investor they tried to scam tonight understands the exact nature of their hosts. The military taught me a very valuable lesson about asymmetrical warfare. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a fatal mistake. My legal team in Washington was alerted the second you filed that forged deed at the county clerk's office. We could have filed an emergency injunction. We could have stopped the title transfer before the ink dried. We could have saved you from yourselves and left you with nothing but a bruised ego and a misdemeanor charge. I pause, letting a cold, humorless smile touch my lips. It is a terrifying expression built from years of discipline and the sweet anticipation of absolute justice. But I explicitly ordered my attorneys to stand down. I wanted the transaction to clear. I needed your father's syndicate cash to cross state banking lines and land directly in the Washington Elite Development's corporate checking account. I needed you to sign the receipt. I needed you to finalize the federal felony so deeply that not even the most expensive defense attorney in Atlanta could dig you out. Jamal is practically hyperventilating now. His hands are buried in his hair, tugging at the roots, his chest heaving beneath his poorly fitted tuxedo. He looks wildly at his father, begging for Marcus to pull some miraculous manipulative trick out of his sleeve to fix the situation the way he has fixed every other mistake Jamal has ever made. But Marcus is broken. The patriarch has been completely dismantled, his carefully crafted illusion of control shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "You have nothing!" Jamal suddenly screams, his voice cracking with a pathetic, volatile desperation. The sound echoes jarringly through the silent room. "You are just talking. The money is in our account. We checked the balance an hour before this party started. The funds cleared. We won Zuri. You are just trying to scare us because you lost your damn mind." I turn my gaze back to my brother. I look at him with the profound, hollow pity one reserves for a creature that does not realize it is already dead. There is no anger left in me. There is only the cold execution of the final protocol. "You did not get my house, Jamal," I say, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet hush that instantly forces the entire room to lean in. A forged deed transferring a trust-protected asset is void ab initio. It holds zero legal weight in any court in this country. The Vanguard Trust still owns the property, and it always will. I let that legal absolute settle over them, watching the last glimmer of their stolen victory extinguish behind their eyes. And as for your grand victory, I continue delivering the final devastating tactical strike. As for that $850,000 of illegal syndicate cash you are currently using to finance this ridiculous party, I lean forward, my eyes locking onto Chloe, making sure she understands exactly who orchestrated her downfall. "The bank froze your corporate accounts at exactly 6 o'clock this morning, pending a joint federal investigation by the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS and the FBI. You do not have a company. You do not have a fortune. You have absolutely nothing but a digital paper trail leading directly to a federal indictment." The silence following my declaration does not simply fade. It shatters completely, replaced by a rising, chaotic wave of panicked voices. The reality of the legal trap has fully materialized in the minds of every educated investor, lawyer, and politician in the room. They understand the absolute severity of federal wire fraud and money laundering. They know exactly what happens when the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS freezes a corporate account. The guests are no longer just backing away in polite discomfort. They are actively fleeing. Chairs scrape harshly against the polished marble floor. Expensive crystal cocktail glasses are abandoned hastily on linen-draped tables, spilling expensive champagne across the fabric. The wealthy elite of Atlanta are rushing for the coat check, and the valet their faces masks of pure self-preservation, desperate to erase their names from the guest list of an active federal crime scene. Marcus watches his carefully constructed empire disintegrate in real time. The vibrant, confident color completely drains from his face, leaving his skin a terrifying ashen white. His knees finally give out beneath him. The man who spent his entire life projecting an image of untouchable superiority collapses heavily onto the first step of the presentation stage. He is gasping for air, his hands clutching desperately at the lapels of his tuxedo. He is doing the legal arithmetic in his head, and the sum is terrifying. Forgery of a federal document, wire fraud across state lines, criminal conspiracy, money laundering for a known syndicate. Each individual charge carries a mandatory minimum sentence. He is looking at 20 to 30 years in a federal penitentiary. He will never wear a tailored suit again. He will die in a concrete cell, stripped of all his manufactured dignity. The realization hits him with such immense physical force that he begins to dry heave, a broken, pathetic patriarch choking on the bitter ashes of his own ruined ambition. Jamal spins around. The sheer blinding terror of impending prison time completely strips away his usual cowardly deference to his wife and her family's money. He turns on Chloe with a visceral, explosive rage. His face is flushed dark red, his veins popping visibly against his neck. "What did you do?" Jamal screams, his voice cracking violently into a hysterical pitch. He steps toward her, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "You told me your father was legitimate. You told me this was a clean cash advance to clear my debts. You dragged me into a federal syndicate, you stupid, arrogant brat." Chloe recoils as if she has been slapped. Her perfectly styled hair flies around her face as she stumbles back in her expensive designer heels. The haughty high society mask she wore so proudly all evening is entirely gone. She looks like a terrified, cornered child. "Do not yell at me!" Chloe shrieks back, her voice shrill and trembling with rising panic. "My father said it was foolproof. He said it was just a standard shell transfer. He promised me the escrow company was blind and that no one would ever flag the routing numbers. He used us!" Jamal bellows, spittle flying from his lips as he loses all control. He gestures wildly toward the giant LED screen displaying the undeniable proof of their crimes. "Your father used my family to wash his dirty money, and now we are the ones holding the bag. We are the ones registered on the corporate account. We signed the receiving documents. The FBI is going to throw me in a cage for the rest of my life because of your family." Chloe ignores his screaming. Her manicured hands are shaking so violently she can barely operate her diamond-encrusted smartphone. She swipes frantically at the screen, her fingers slipping on the glass as she searches for her recent contacts. She hits speed dial and holds the phone to her ear, her chest heaving with short, panicked breaths. The ballroom is loud with the sound of fleeing guests slamming doors and Jamal's incoherent shouting. But standing above them on the stage, wrapped in my own absolute stillness, I can see the exact moment Chloe's world completely stops turning. She pulls the phone away from her ear, a look of profound confusion crossing her features. She stares at the screen. She taps the speed dial again, jabbing her finger against the glass. She lifts it back to her ear, pressing it so hard against her skin, her knuckles turn a stark white. "Pick up," she begs, her voice dropping to a desperate, ragged whisper that carries over the noise. "Pick up the phone, Dad, please, I need you. Pick up." She pulls the phone away again. She looks at the screen, her mouth parting in a silent scream of realization. The line is dead. The number has been disconnected entirely. The syndicate boss did exactly what syndicate bosses do when a federal trap snaps shut around their associates. He severed the compromised limb to save the main body. He completely burned his own burner phones, abandoned his corporate shells, and left his own daughter behind to take the fall for his illicit operation. Chloe drops her phone. It hits the hard marble floor with a sharp, definitive crack, the screen splintering into a massive spiderweb of broken glass. She falls to her knees right there in the center of the Peachtree Estates ballroom, sobbing uncontrollably. Her expensive designer gown pools around her in a pathetic, ruined heap. She is completely, utterly alone, abandoned by the very father whose criminal wealth gave her such an immense sense of superiority. Jamal is pacing in tight, erratic circles, breathing like a marathon runner who has just collapsed at the finish line. He looks at his weeping wife. He looks at his hyperventilating, broken father groveling on the stage steps. And finally, his desperate, terrified eyes look up at me. He looks at the sister he spent his entire life belittling, bullying, and stealing from. He opens his mouth, taking a step toward the podium. I can see the plea forming on his lips. He is going to beg. He is going to plead for mercy, to ask me to utilize my government clearance to call off the federal lawyers, to magically fix the catastrophic, life-ending mess he created out of his own pure greed. I do not give him the chance to speak a single word. I look past his sweating, terrified face. I look past the few remaining petrified guests and the tables covered in spilled champagne. I look directly toward the massive floor-to-ceiling glass doors at the grand front entrance of the country club. The deep velvet black of the Atlanta night is suddenly pierced by a rhythmic flashing light. It starts as a faint reflection bouncing off the glass panes, then rapidly multiplies in intensity. Brilliant strobing flashes of aggressive red and blue begin to paint the walls of the grand ballroom. The spinning lights bounce off the crystal chandeliers, casting eerie, moving shadows across the terrified faces of my father and my brother. The sound of heavy sirens wails in the distance, cutting through the night air, growing louder and more deafening with every passing second until the noise vibrates against the glass doors. I reach out and grasp the microphone. The cool metal feels incredibly grounding against my palm. I project my voice one last time, letting it ring out over the sound of the approaching sirens and the pathetic sobbing of my ruined family. "Dad? Jamal?" I say, my tone carrying the absolute chilling finality of a judge delivering an inescapable sentence. "You are not real estate moguls. You are not high society investors. You are federal criminals. And your guests have arrived." The heavy oak and glass doors of the Peachtree Estate's grand ballroom are violently shoved open. They are not simply pushed, they are tactically breached. A heavily armed unit of federal agents, wearing dark windbreakers, with the bright yellow letters FBI stamped across their backs, floods the entryway. Their heavy boots thud against the polished marble floor in perfect, terrifying synchronization. The remaining country club elites scatter like terrified insects, pressing their bodies against the gilded walls to avoid the path of the advancing federal strike team. Leading the unit is Special Agent in Charge Miller, a man with a face carved from absolute granite. He steps into the center of the room, holding up a federal warrant that catches the aggressive strobing red and blue lights pulsing from the squad cars outside. "Marcus Washington, Jamal Washington, Chloe Jenkins." Agent Miller's voice booms through the cavernous space, carrying the crushing, undeniable weight of the United States government. "You are all under arrest for federal wire fraud conspiracy to commit money laundering and racketeering." The sharp metallic click-clack of ratcheting steel handcuffs slices through the residual panic in the room. Agents flank Chloe first. She shrieks violently, pulling away her designer gown, tearing at the seam, but her manicured wrists are swiftly and efficiently secured behind her back. Jamal does not even attempt to fight or argue. The reality of his absolute ruin has hollowed him out. He simply goes limp, his knees buckling beneath him as two federal agents hoist him upward by his armpits, slapping the heavy cuffs onto his wrists. He looks like a deflated balloon, his expensive tailored tuxedo bunching awkwardly around his shoulders as he is marched toward the exit. His head hangs low in total absolute humiliation. The golden child, the supposed heir to the empire, completely and utterly broken in front of the entire city. I step away from the acrylic podium. The perspective of the room shifts, drawing the eye upward as I descend the short flight of wooden steps from the stage. I move with the slow, deliberate, unyielding grace of an executioner whose work is entirely finished. My posture is immaculate. As the heel of my shoe makes contact with the ballroom floor, Marcus finally snaps. He lunges forward, throwing his entire body weight toward me. He drops heavily onto his knees, the expensive fabric of his trousers tearing against the hard marble. He reaches out his trembling, sweating hands, grasping desperately at the hem of my obsidian suit pants. His face is a grotesque, unrecognizable mask of snot tears and pure, unfiltered terror. "Zuri, Zuri, please!" Marcus wails, the sound tearing from his throat in a pathetic grating noise that makes the remaining guests physically cringe. Tell them it is just a misunderstanding. It is a paperwork error. You can fix this. You have the government clearance. Withdraw the complaint. I am your father, Zuri. I am your father. We are blood. Family is supposed to protect each other." I stop walking. I look down at him from my vantage point. I do not flinch. I do not pull my leg away immediately. I let him stay there on his knees for a long, agonizing cinematic second, allowing the entire room, the federal agents, the remaining socialites, the silent waitstaff, to witness the great arrogant Marcus Washington begging on the floor at the feet of the daughter he so casually discarded. Then with a swift, sharp, entirely merciless motion, I swat his hands away from my clothing. My eyes are completely dead, devoid of a single ounce of pity, empathy, or hesitation. I look at him not as a father, but as a neutralized combatant. "When you threw me out of my own home," I say, my voice a quiet, lethal hiss that slices cleanly through his pathetic sobbing. When you stood in that foyer, changed the locks, and laughed in my face. When you looked me in the eye and told me I was a worthless failure who would never amount to anything. Did you remember you were my father then? Marcus chokes on a ragged sob, his empty hands hovering in the air, his mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. Family protects each other, Marcus, I state coldly, taking a deliberate step backward so Agent Miller can move in. But parasites must be removed. Agent Miller clamps a heavy hand onto Marcus's shoulder, forcefully spinning the patriarch around and ratcheting the steel cuffs tightly onto his wrists. Marcus's legs drag uselessly behind him as he is hauled to his feet and marched out of the grand ballroom, crying out incoherently into the flashing night. I stand alone in the center of the silent, ruined ballroom. On the massive LED screen behind the stage, the fabricated golden logo of Washington Elite Developments glitches one final time before dying, completely plunging the screen into total darkness. The fraudulent empire of black excellence he had so violently obsessed over, an empire built entirely on theft, arrogance, and deception, has officially dissolved into nothing but smoke, shattered glass, and federal indictments. The harsh, strobing glare of the red and blue police lights bleeding through the country club windows slowly dissolves, melting seamlessly into the soft, amber warmth of a crackling fireplace. The deafening wail of federal sirens fades into the gentle, rhythmic popping of burning cedar. The camera begins a slow, deliberate pull-out, widening the frame inch by inch to reveal the sanctuary of my living room. We are back inside the very estate they so arrogantly attempted to steal. The rich mahogany floors gleam under the warm, recessed lighting. The space is immaculate, untouched, and fundamentally secure. I am seated comfortably on the plush leather sofa, my posture relaxed, the tension of the past month entirely evaporated from my shoulders. I raise a crystal glass of full-bodied Cabernet to my lips, taking a slow, appreciative sip. The silence in this house is no longer the suffocating quiet of an impending ambush. It is the deep, resonant silence of total, absolute victory. The wheels of federal justice are known to grind slowly, but when handed a perfectly packaged, fully documented conspiracy on a silver platter, they grind exceedingly fine. It took less than 8 months for the United States Attorney's Office to untangle the sheer volume of their financial ineptitude. Marcus and Jamal did not receive the high-profile, glamorous courtroom showdown they probably envisioned in their narcissistic delusions. There were no dramatic legal maneuvers, no high-paid defense attorneys swooping in to save the day, and no loopholes to exploit. Confronted with the irrefutable digital footprint of their wire fraud and the undeniable testimony of the forged notary, they completely folded. They took a crushing plea deal to avoid spending the rest of their natural lives behind bars. Marcus and Jamal were handed concurrent 5-year sentences in a federal penitentiary. Minimum security, but a cage nonetheless. There are no country clubs where they are going. There are no bespoke tuxedo fittings, no networking galas, and no sycophants to feed their endless hunger for validation. They are just 2 more inmate numbers stripped of their names, their manufactured dignity, and their fraudulent empire. The grand vision of Washington Elite Developments was reduced to a stack of damning court transcripts and a cautionary tale whispered among the Atlanta elite about the catastrophic dangers of absolute arrogance. I did not attend their sentencing hearings. I had already witnessed their true execution that night on the ballroom stage. The blast radius of my trap, however, extended much further than my immediate bloodline. When the FBI and the IRS froze that $850,000, they essentially grabbed the loose thread that unraveled Chloe's father's entire criminal tapestry. The syndicate boss, who thought he was untouchable, found his operation dragged into the blinding light of a federal microscope. He was indicted on dozens of counts of racketeering, aggressive tax evasion, and systemic financial fraud. The government moved with ruthless efficiency, seizing his luxury assets, liquidating his offshore accounts, and forcing his labyrinth of shell companies into immediate catastrophic bankruptcy. Chloe's reaction to her family's total annihilation was entirely predictable. The moment the illicit money evaporated and the federal indictments dropped, her manufactured loyalty vanished into thin air. She immediately shifted into pure panicked survival mode. She filed for divorce from Jamal before he even saw the inside of his holding cell, desperately attempting to sever legal ties and shield herself from the fallout. But there was absolutely nothing left for her to shield. She was stripped of her illicit trust funds, her fleet of luxury vehicles, and her unearned, arrogant status. She walked away from the wreckage of her marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back, facing a harsh, unforgiving introduction to the reality of the working class she had spent her entire life despising. As for the property, it remained exactly where I left it. The Vanguard Financial Law Irrevocable Trust absorbed their pathetic, amateurish attack without sustaining a single crack in its legal armor. The forged deed was wiped from the county registry with a simple stroke of a federal judge's pen, completely erasing their fraudulent claim. The house stands now not just as a monument to my financial independence, but as an impenetrable fortress of my absolute sovereignty. I returned to my deployment in Okinawa, precisely 2 weeks after the ballroom incident. The military intelligence community places a high premium on analytical precision, emotional detachment, and the ability to neutralize hostile threats with extreme prejudice. My handling of the domestic situation back in Atlanta did not go unnoticed by my superiors. I was promoted within the year. I now command a specialized division that tracks and dismantles international financial terrorism, utilizing the exact same strategic skills I used to legally obliterate my own father's pathetic syndicate. I live a life of total, unburdened freedom. I wake up every single morning without the suffocating weight of conditional love pressing down on my chest. I operate without the endless, draining demands of a toxic family unit that saw me only as a convenient resource to be exploited and discarded at will. I excised the parasites from my life permanently, and in doing so, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The camera continues its slow, steady retreat, pulling further back until the frame captures the sheer scale of the beautiful, quiet estate. I am just a calm, composed figure seated in the center of it all, bathed in the warm light of the fire. I look directly into the lens-locking eyes with anyone who has ever been made to feel small, unworthy, or disposable by the very people who were supposed to protect them. People say blood is what connects us, but sometimes blood is just an excuse for people to strip you bare without feeling guilty. Never cry over those who see you as a stepping stone. Be smarter than them, build a trust fund, and let the law handle the rest. I am Zuri Washington, and this is my story. The ultimate lesson here is that your self-worth is never defined by those who belittle you. True power often lies in silence and strategic preparation. When toxic individuals attempt to tear you down, the most devastating response isn't explosive anger, but quiet success and unshakable boundaries. You don't have to accept the victim role just because someone assigned it to you. Reclaim your narrative, protect your peace, and let natural consequences handle the rest. Blood does not excuse abuse, and walking away is your greatest victory. Share your own story of resilience in the comments below and subscribe for more.